Welcome to the Cyber Insights Podcast, brought to you by the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, joined today by my co-host, Mr. Altan Bulut. Our guest today is Mr. Justin Cobb, and we'll be discussing with him the topic of resilience in the digital age, mastering business continuity. Let's get into this episode. Today's topic is resilience in the digital age, mastering business continuity. In an era where cyber threats, system failures, and operational disruptions are inevitable, mastering business continuity is critical for organizational survival and success. Companies that invest in strong business continuity and disaster recovery planning don't just bounce back from crises, they gain a competitive edge by minimizing downtime and ensuring seamless operations. Joining us today is a leader in business continuity and enterprise resilience, Mr. Justin Cobb. With extensive experience in business continuity, disaster recovery, and IT resilience, Justin has led major continuity initiatives at a number of well-known IT organizations. He specializes in helping organizations strengthen their resilience, planning, and mitigate disruptions before they happen. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. We're super excited to have you here. Altan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jim. Very excited to have Justin on the show today.
Good to see you, Altan.
Good to see you. Welcome.
So, Justin, what we like to oftentimes do is we like to kind of talk a little bit about the guest's background when we first begin the show. And I thought maybe since you've built an impressive career in business continuity and disaster recovery, can you walk us through your journey and what led you to specialize in enterprise resilience?
Sure. So when I first moved my way into IT, I was in networking. I became a network engineer and kind of stayed in that space. But, you know, network engineers are just kind of glorified IT firefighters, right? And it was a lot of fun, but I started getting tired of constantly putting out fires. I mean, that was the nature of the job. I had an opportunity to switch over from networking, network engineering, and operations over to business continuity during the merger of AOL and Yahoo when those two companies became the same. And the reason for it was I just felt like moving into business continuity, I became more of a trying to prevent the fire than fixing the fire. And that's really what I like about it. It's a lot more thought-provoking for me and just trying to strategize around preventing the possibility of an event.
Understood. Since you brought up AOL and Yahoo and your background in them, I'm wondering, can you maybe elaborate and explain a little bit more about how those experiences helped shape your approach and your thinking and your processes around enterprise resilience?
Sure. So I'll even go back one before that. I really started at Fannie Mae and just seeing how they did their kind of yearly annual testing and managing their projects around their resiliency. When I went to AOL and Yahoo, it was managed very differently. What I came to realize is that in both environments, for business continuity in particular, the culture of the company probably has as much weight as the actual work that you're doing, which is very different than network engineering. So I just felt like working with business continuity, you really had to talk to the leaders, making sure that they kind of understood or kind of valued business continuity and were willing to work with you and support you. If you think about it, business continuity focuses on, again, preventing a fire, right? Preventing a disaster. So best case scenario, you might not see the disaster that I'm preventing if I'm successful, which is very different than any other space, right? So you're paying me for something you don't see overtly. So again, trying to understand that the politics of the environment, the culture of the company, really became something that I became aware of having a lot of impact around the work that I was doing, which I just hadn't experienced before.
So you defined the term business continuity for our audience. We've also used the term disaster recovery. Can you maybe elaborate on what those two are, maybe compare and contrast, or at least shed light on the fact that they're not necessarily the exact same thing?
Agreed. So business continuity is more like the things you do before an event and even in the midst of an event. whereas disaster recovery really takes place after the event has already, after the impact has already happened. So things like disaster recovery is easily recognized as being, tape backups, restoring from tape, restoring from digital backups that you may have, whereas business continuity is more like what are the steps you take before the event, and then when the event happens, what are the steps you take to kind of help mitigate the event, to shorten the impact of it.
So I guess then maybe to use some of the terminology we learned way back when we all joined the cyber ranks, your business continuity is kind of more of a preventative type of
That's
control,
correct.
and your disaster recovery is really more like on the corrective. Is that a good way to think of it?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so do you specialize in one area or the other of those two?
Primarily business continuity.
So you try to prevent the stuff.
I try to prevent. I'm trying to prevent the fire from happening.
That makes sense. So, can you talk a little bit about why these two concepts are so critical now more than ever? I mean, like what's it's a big area of focus within cyber. We talk about BCP and DRP. Mm-hmm. Why do we care about it? Why does it really matter?
I think in general, companies are always going to be impacted, right? I mean, by something. We know it's inevitable for there to be some level of an outage, whether that's an IT outage. Of course, it can ramp up from there to, the building burning, right? And so, again, we've primarily focused, at least in the earlier days before business continuity became so prevalent, we really focused on getting the firefighters, right, to put out the fire, whether that be the IT people, the help desk people, but the impact that already happened. I think somewhere along the line, at least in the IT world, I tried to look it up as to when this really became more and more prevalent. They talked about during the mainframe days when they had chillers, right, to try to keep the mainframe cooler so it wouldn't break down or wouldn't overheat, I should say. That they decided that they made sure they had more than one. I mean, it's not rocket science, but having, even today, having two cars is better than just having one car in case one car breaks down. And so from there, from the mainframe, it just kind of, multiplied itself out. We had mainframes, we ended up having desktop computers, we had servers, multiple servers, and then we had data centers. It just kept metastasizing and growing bigger. And so the prevalence of business continuity popped itself up probably in the mid-'80s, where it just became, how do we put steps in place to help prevent being impacted or help minimize how long the impact, impacted the company. I read something a couple of weeks ago that said 25% of the companies who experienced an impact, if the impact lasted longer than a day but less than a week, 25% of those companies went out of business. Had to file bankruptcy, to be clear. If the impact lasted longer than a week, 80% of those businesses folded. So just from a numbers standpoint, to minimize the amount of the length of an event from impacting the bottom line for the company really prevents a company from folding, right? I mean, it's pretty basic. But by then, if you think about it, you're saving not just the company, you're saving jobs, you're saving people, and then now that these companies are becoming more integrated, business to business opportunities, one company impacts another company, and so the impact is now broader than just one company. So by saving Yahoo, as a good example, I can save other companies and its effects.
So, Justin, when we think about the business continuity and how companies think about making sure that they have effective business continuity and disaster recovery to a certain extent in place, throughout your tenure, have you noticed shifts in terms of the primary causes of what actually impacts companies in terms of like what hits their bottom line, like what kind of events cause that type of bankruptcy situations for companies? Like, has that shifted over the last few decades?
Slightly, it has. I would say that the majority of the impacts that I have seen, excuse me, the majority of impacts that I have seen have probably been related to some type of network outage, right? Network going down, a fiber being cut, and so they're not able to process or share the data, right, with their customer like they're supposed to. As far as change in that space, right, I think is the cloud is probably the biggest shift that we're dealing with now, where people are shifting to a data center that's overtly not theirs, right? It's in the cloud. The cloud is kind of striated data across multiple data centers, right? If you think of it that way, I always say that the past is prologue, right? Yeah. Back in the days when we had disks, we striated information across multiple disks, and that was the big thing at one time. And we're doing the same thing. We're again striating information across multiple data centers, and so it does lessen the number of impacts that are being felt, because for a whole data center to go down is less likely, and they're able to mitigate it much faster. But again, having that data being sent out or having those processes be interrupted by the loss of connectivity is still probably the biggest impact that most companies feel.
So how do you think about some of the agency focus, like the risks that have agency, for example, a ransomware gang attacking your organization and holding you hostage after encrypting a substantial amount of your infrastructure and the data that is hosted. So that, like, how does that compare? Do you see significant shifts over there in terms of what enterprises used to prioritize in terms of like what do we need to be proactive about, whether it be having their backups like immutable or maybe multiple backups or having some sort of other safeguards around that? And then do you see like shift to cloud have the same benefits that you might have, like when you can with the cloud you can distribute all of your workload across the globe, maybe like across major cloud providers in different regions and availability zones? That might give you some built-in maybe redundancy. But when it comes to something like ransomware, or maybe someone having exfiltrated your data or maybe holding you hostage, you can't do your basic functions. So how do you think about that, and how it ties to the overall business continuity picture?
Sure. So let me answer the last part first. The interesting part to me is, as it relates to the cloud, you mentioned, from a global impact, right? When a company had its own and operated data center that was theirs physically, we probably really focused on just one particular region, right? I only had to worry about, let's say, a snowstorm hitting just DC, right? When the own and operated then said, well, the companies decided to have multiple data centers that were theirs, but in multiple locations. Okay, fine, no problem. I now have to worry about snowstorm or hurricanes, et cetera, right? These natural disasters hitting, DC and maybe 2 or 3 other areas. But now with the cloud, right, it's kind of it's strengthened that concern that now I need to be concerned about global, right? Global, if I have a data center in Singapore, or I'm sorry, if I know that a cloud has data centers in Singapore, a cloud region has data centers in Singapore, I now need to be concerned about the geography over there, the weather over there, right, and even the political climate in that area.
You have a bigger impact surface, if it makes sense.
That's correct. That's correct. And so I think that's probably one of the newest things that companies have to kind of process in this space. As far as being, monopolized or owned by somebody, or as a threat, is that what you were asking?
I'm thinking more about like maybe like, a lot of people have the conception that the cloud might help them in terms of like if I have a single data center, I might see that as a single point of failure. But if I can distribute that across 35 data centers,
right,
that might like reduce the like catastrophic impact of one of them going down.
But if you're only
when
dealing with
yeah,
one cloud provider,
yeah, you know, I was trying to tie that back to the like cyber attack point of view. Like, does that help you in the same way when somebody infects your environment with ransomware and holds it hostage?
that's
Yeah.
a great question. So, as it relates to the cloud, let's just say itself, not your presence, but the cloud provider itself. Knowing that you are in a particular cloud area, knowing where your company is, it does help the hackers, right, or the threat agents for cyber to at least for them it's a bigger bang for the buck, right? If they know that they can target, let's just say, one region of a particular cloud host, they might be able to impact multiple companies by just targeting one region, right? Which is very different than if it was an owned and operated. If a company had their own owned and operated data center, then it's specific, right? They know they're only impacting one company. Now there's a kind of a conversation out there that says perhaps we should have, a space in multiple cloud hosts, right? So that if anything does happen with one particular cloud provider, we are already up and running or already have a footprint that is available for us with another cloud host. So there's conversations about that. I think that's kind of a newer thing as we figure out what the cloud is and the costs that come along with it.
Yeah.
So let's break down the fundamentals of business continuity. Can we talk a little bit about what the core elements are of an effective continuity program? What like if someone were coming to you and say, what do I need to have? What does it look like?
Sure. So I think that the key components are to try to figure out, what are the things that you want to protect, right? People talk about the 4 Ps being one of them. You have people, premise, like we talked about earlier, as far as data centers, processes, people, processes, premise, and oh God, I forgot the last P. It'll come back to me.
No worries.
But you have to figure out what the company is trying to protect. If it's trying to protect people, then you want to have a plan in place, right? To create a plan that will manage any impact that those people might feel directly, right? And whether that's a fire, right? Something as simple as like when we were in school, we used to have the fire drills, right? And technically that was a business continuity plan being executed. And so you create the plans, you review the plans, you test the plans. You want to make sure that they are executing in the way that you expect with the outcome that you expect. You want to try to have a business impact analysis, right, where you can either work with leaders, depending on what level, engineers, work with somebody who is aware of these things that require protecting and get some data from them. What is the value of this piece of the company that you manage? What does it rely on? How much money should we spend on trying to protect it? Definitely, you want to make sure that you're not spending $1,000 to protect a $50 product or a product that makes $50 a year. That just doesn't quite equate. So you always want to keep that in mind. And then you want to make sure that all of this stuff, the business impact analysis, the testing plans, the testing data that comes from the test is reported so that everyone understands in the company exactly what they have, that it is safe, and what the results of those tests were.
I think the 4th P is providers, by the way. I just looked it up in
Thank
real
you.
time.
Thank you.
So how do you think that part comes into the planning and execution of that plan overall, like the providers, and how do you go about like optimizing your suppliers and vendors? That might also tie back to the cloud providers. To a
Absolutely, it
certain
does.
extent.
And I think that for me, it becomes interesting, especially today. If I can just get a little bit of leeway with that question, and I'll answer it. today, as all of these companies mesh, right, we're becoming so integrated. We're more integrated now. Obviously, the World Wide Web has something to do with it than I think we probably have ever been. So if you're talking about providers, you definitely want to make sure, if we're talking about having contracts, you want to make sure that those contracts are in place and that the people that you do business with also have plans on their end, so that if they're impacted, it doesn't impact you and your bottom line. One of the things I have seen are definitely having audits that come and that do audits for your company, like a PwC, et cetera, that can do an audit and say, hey, here's a score for your continuity plan. I've seen business-to-business relationships where a person that company A wants to have a contract with company B. Company A would say, we want to do business with you, but we'd like to see what is your business continuity plan. Obviously, you wouldn't share the totality of it, but they just want to make sure you have a plan in place. So even these business-to-business relationships are helping to push more companies to have put more plans in place and force that hand, where sometimes the companies may not want to, or may not want to spend the money to.
I want to stay on that point a little bit longer when it comes to what information you need to get from the vendors and providers. Like, do you have any favorite type of audit reports that gives you that reliable set of pieces of information that you'll need to be inputs into your planning? Because what I hear from a lot of GRC professionals is that a lot of companies just don't want you to read their reports anymore. They just want you to this is our key points, key summary of 10 bullet points of what the SOC 2 reports are showing, from the last 2 years, and then it says that we are compliant. Isn't that enough for you? Why do you need to have the full report? How do you think about all that?
In our space, it's a little different. Me personally, I don't have a preference as to which audit company is selected.
Not necessarily the company, but the type of report maybe. A lot of people seem to think SOC 2 Type 2 is comprehensive enough to give you an idea of how the control environment actually works, how effective it is, because it's been tested, not just the design, right?
Yeah.
The effectiveness of it too.
For an external report, again, for me, that's not necessarily my concern.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that my goal is always to say, from a business continuity standpoint, if you're in a company, right, you look at it like a football game. If wherever you are currently, wherever the type of maturity of the business continuity plan, that's kind of where you are, and you want to have an idea of where you want to go, right? Let's call that the end zone. And let's say that might be maybe a complete 100% enterprise risk management ERM plan, right, where everything is integrated and we can get 100% reports. The idea then for me is, well, how do I get there, right? The culture, the leadership are not going to allow me to spend, $100,000, let's say, as a bad example, $100,000 to get to the end zone this year. It's not going to happen. Matter of fact, it might not even happen over the next 10 years, right? But we need to take small steps going forward every year, make adjustments, and take small steps, ideally. And so I think for me, the biggest thing is to really find ways to create incremental steps to increase the scope and breadth of your business continuity program within a particular company.
Okay. So any challenges that you see with especially with the vendor side, provider side?
Yeah, from the vendors, it's really more, sometimes they may have pushback about how much they want to communicate of their business continuity plan. You have to keep that in mind and take what they give you and try to see what you can extrapolate from it. The other piece is, a lot of some third-party applications, let's say, that you might have a contract with, might have total proprietary information on their end that they are not willing to share. And so you just have to be really flexible with that. But the most important part is that if my company says we're going to work with company A or B, do they have their own plans? Then yes. And then from there, I need to figure out, well, if this relationship is successful, that's good. I also then need to make sure that if A is not available, that we have a company B in place. So I don't overtly get too caught up with the contracts with the vendor, but I just need to make sure that my company is as protected as possible.
Totally makes sense.
So I was wondering if we could maybe talk for a moment about best practices around developing, testing, and refining business continuity plans. So someone comes to you and says, Justin, I've inherited this organization or this part of this organization. We haven't really done any kind of business continuity planning in the past, or maybe it's a really, really old plan that I don't have any confidence in. What would be your recommendations on how they would approach trying to flush out and ultimately build their own decent business continuity plan?
Yeah. Again, for me, the really big piece is to really try to figure out where is leadership on this new plan. Because if you can get their buy-in, if they are totally bought in, that's great. Then that obviously makes things easier. But usually that's not the case. So you want to really figure out, how much support do you have in this direction. Find out what's important to the company. What is it you're trying to protect? From a technology standpoint, if they have a CMDB, right, that kind of defines all of the pieces of the company.
Can you define what that acronym is?
Sure, a centralized database management tool, essentially,
Okay.
right? Something maybe even as simple as like a ServiceNow, if it's not homegrown. So like
Got
a
it.
ServiceNow could be that.
Okay.
You can look at that tool to say, okay, well, what are the different parts of the company that the company has identified and separated. And then from there, I think the next step is to just go and talk to each one of the leaders in the different parts of the company, and then try to work with them to go through like a business impact analysis, which you will need to understand, again, the value of a particular piece or asset or application of a company before you review it. The standard usually is 1 year testing, right, for every part of the business, meaning that I will test you this year. I'm going to do an assessment of you this year. And then next year, give or take around the same time, we will probably come back and do the same thing again. And that's primarily because the direction that leadership chooses may tend to change, right? What was important 2 years ago may not be important next year. But that also then means that something else new has moved up in its importance, and you need to assess that accordingly. So usually an annual test of any part or piece of the business is pretty standard in the industry. And then from there, the next biggest thing is definitely providing reports and scorings of all of the testing that has been done.
I want to ask you about the business impact analysis portion of it. As you're probably very familiar with that's like the beginning stage, right? Without the business impact analysis, you don't have business continuity planning. That determines like what is critical for your businesses to survive, like your primary functions.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that the relevant stakeholders are involved in all that business impact analysis process to determine like what is critical for this business? Like, how do you ensure that you get the business and operations and then the relevant people involved and stay engaged and provide the necessary input into that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Again, you really need to get an idea of the goal of the impact analysis is to tell you, what does the company value, right? What makes the most money? Let's say, in simple terms, if we have 10 applications, and I'll try to keep it technical that way. If we have 10 applications, which one of these 10 make the company the most money, right? Which one of these 10 might have the most footprint on the internet, right? So those are things we want to protect. When you're dealing with those specific applications, you want to talk to the leadership, and you might actually have that form filled out by two different people, right? To your point, you might have the leadership fill it out, because they'll understand some of the non-technical aspects of the application that require testing or the part of the business. But then also you're going to want to get somebody to also fill it out who's a little more closer to the ground of maintaining it. Now that might be an engineer, that might be a manager or process owner, and have them fill it out as well, and then compare those answers to kind of get a broader picture of the importance of this piece of the business that we're trying to understand.
So the units like sales or marketing, would they be involved? Like when you think about like brand value, for example, like what happens if our website gets defaced or something like that, that would have impacts that may
That's
not
correct.
be easily measurable, but would still have impacts on the business?
That's correct. So ideally, you probably wouldn't have the salesperson fill it out, but you do want sales data, right?
Yeah.
The data from sales incorporated at some level within that business impact analysis. And so that might be, the revenue, right? From a revenue stream, how much money is being brought in. And like you said, how many users, right? From a branding standpoint, how many users are we getting per day? And that data, again, you can find out from a
and
network
how much
perspective.
those users are paying for
Absolutely.
each service or
Right.
product.
Right, and that goes back to the revenue. But even if it's not, right, let's think of something like mail, right? Mail by itself, no one is probably not paying for mail. No one pays for Gmail, right? But you can find how many users are interacting or logging into Gmail every day. They can get that data, and so that would definitely speak to the brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about technology, right? Kind of maybe shift gears to it a little bit. We know that technology, of course, is continuing to play an important role in organizations, and was wondering what your thoughts were relative to like how some of the emerging technologies that are out there, whether it's cloud, automation, other types of predictive and analytics, how do they influence or enhance or somehow, impact the business continuity strategies?
Yeah, so we've talked about the cloud. That's probably the biggest one. But if I were to introduce another one beside that one, I probably would recommend talk about AI, right? That is definitely the big buzzword on the street. And I think from a business continuity standpoint, it's the idea that you could give an AI tool all of the numbers and metrics it might need to maybe be predictive, right? To say, something simple like AI might look at a weather report and say, they're saying 6 feet of snow in this particular region. What steps do we need to take to move to make sure the data is protected? So that's the good of it. As data becomes so big, right? I mean, previously we didn't even have data engineers, but that's now a degree right in school. So data has become so large, big data, that analyzing it is becoming a challenge, right? So AI comes in and says, I can essentially help you analyze larger scopes of data faster, or include larger scopes of data into a solution. And so the thought is then that you can ask AI or create scripts within AI that if AI comes up with a prediction, that ideally it could execute a script to take action to help prevent an impactful event. There's good and there's bad to that. Of course, as we all know, AI is only as good as the person who submitted the data, right? So there's limitations to it. I think best case scenario, if we do include AI in this way, we still need ideally having a person there to look at maybe AI's suggestion and actually saying, yes, this is a good next step to take. Right, or that AI brings a collaborative amount of information, geopolitical, weather, understanding the geopolitics of something over in Singapore that we might not be focusing on, right? And making a suggestion that maybe we might want to move out our data assets out of the Singapore environment to some other place to be safe. I think we can use AI as a tool, but I'm always concerned about using it to make its own decisions concretely without some type of human thought behind it, right?
So you're kind of alluding to one of the paradigms that they talk about in the AI space, which is AI assisted versus AI driven.
Agreed.
And I hear you talk a lot about the AI assisted piece. I think you've kind of already alluded to my second piece, but I'm wondering, are there AI driven solutions today from a business continuity perspective? Because it seems to me that when we talk about response, we talked about prevention and we talked about correction, but if it could correct the issue while it happens, there's a lot of power in that as well too.
There is, and I haven't seen that yet.
Okay.
And so it's not to say it's not out there. I just haven't seen it in my space. Correction would be good, but larger step actions I think need to be curtailed, right? Just so it doesn't get out of hand.
Sure.
And that it stays in the hand of a human.
No, I understand. So right now, what you're seeing is really more of the AI-assisted space where it's helping the human make hopefully informed decisions about what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to go about it.
That's right.
That makes a lot of sense. We talked about cloud. How about anything in the other technologies out there like quantum or are you guys seeing any of that in this space?
I haven't seen that yet, but I am sure that the quantum computing is going to present the next iteration of concerns for within AI, right? Just because it's so fast, and as hackers get on there first, right? Like it is feasible that you may have bad actors taking more action against you than you can actually respond to, and so that will be an interesting space. But again, it's at the end of the day, to me, it's very similar to just going the past this prologue, where you're going back to the desktop computer, and now you have to make that change, like we did from mainframe to desktop computing.
And I don't suppose that you've seen any AI systems yet that have actually needed to be protected with business continuity solutions, right? I mean, like the way I envision it right now is most of AI is just a tool that's being used to help facilitate business continuity. Correct. But I assume if you're somebody like OpenAI, right, and your core business is artificial intelligence, you have your own business continuity plans. But I'm wondering, have you seen any of that? I'm curious how that shakes out.
Yeah, I have not yet. I haven't seen AI in a position outside of. I haven't seen AI in a position where it's taking any action of its own. We just haven't gotten that far in the spaces that I've been in. It's not to say somebody's not out there writing it, but always again the concern is just how far do you let it go unassisted, right? Where it is making large scale decisions based on some type of percentage of an event that it thinks is likely.
Understood. I did want to ask you a question too about enterprise risk management, ERM, right? So that's a big talking point within a lot of organizations. And it seems to me that there's a natural space there where business continuity and enterprise risk management kind of go hand in hand, right? They're meant to kind of supplement or support one another. I'm wondering if you can maybe elaborate on maybe best practices in this space, on what you've seen in terms of how you integrate business continuity into an organization's overall risk strategy, risk appetite, risk tolerance, and their ERM overall.
Sure. So enterprise risk management is the larger umbrella that business continuity sits up under, disaster recovery sits up under. Enterprise risk management definitely has a bigger concern as it relates to people, right? Than disaster recovery. Business continuity can include people. I think there are some places where I've seen some companies incorporate people into its decision making, but enterprise risk management has to have people involved, right? And so the challenge in this again is the culture of the company. In order to, as we move further, or I should say, as we get closer and closer to that end zone that I was talking about in my football analogy, right? The end zone is the best case scenario is getting to enterprise risk management. But there's a lot of steps. It requires a lot of support within the company to get there. So primarily, most companies are focused on business continuity and disaster recovery. Very few people within the private sector, and make sure I say that right, within the private sector, and even probably with the exception of banks. Most companies in the private sector are really focused on business continuity and disaster recovery, best case scenario. But when we get to enterprise risk management, you will find a merging of information and plans. One of the things that I noticed at one of my previous jobs was that the business continuity people were kind of siloed, right? You had different teams who were doing different parts of risk management, but they all weren't talking. And so just by design, they couldn't get to an enterprise risk management model because the data or the action plans that were in place were only being monitored by one particular group for that particular business stream. And so my suggestion for anybody who has noticed that within their space is to try to create something like a risk council where you can kind of bring all of these groups together and help get out of the silos, work together collaboratively, and then find cohesive ways of putting the data together and protecting the company at that enterprise level.
So, what do you think some of the primary reasons for? You mentioned a lot of private sector companies not having robust ERM processes or governance structure, if you will, put in place, as opposed to having BCP and DRP. I mean, do they fail to see the value out of it, or is that like not popular, or what are your thoughts on that?
This is a great question. For somebody who values business continuity, I don't understand how somebody doesn't value it, right? Because we're talking about preventing a fire, right? We're talking about preventing an impactful event. But at the end of the day, it will cost some money, right? And so a company, in my experience, that there are just times where they either may not have the funds for it as they see it, or they just may not value it appropriately. But again, we're still in the newer stages of business continuity, kind of truly taking a foothold across multiple industries. And so I think as we move forward, ideally, I think you'll see this happening. But preventative measure is always more idealistic than actually putting out the fire itself, right? People see a fire, they know it needs to go away, but to make sure we sweep the floor and what did the president say? Is clean out the forest, the floor in the forest, right? To prevent a fire. Like nobody's less people seem to be inclined to pay for something like that. But having a firefighter with a hose in his hand, that they understand.
Yeah, I think he said he wanted to rake the forest.
Rake
right?
the forest. Thank you.
That's
Thank
what
you.
it was.
Yes.
I remember that.
Do you see any successful methods or programs that actually make a difference in how enterprises view their approaches? Like, have you seen shifts that were resulted in some maybe like training or some workshops? How do you see like effective methods to actually show the value, like demonstrate the value, other than obviously a disaster actually striking, right?
Yeah, that is a really tough question. It's a tough question because it requires data that I don't overtly have, right? I know that there are times where definitely, obviously, you have training, right, which is simple, and that there are steps that are being put in place at other companies that do value it, where maybe the size of the impact that affects them is lower, right? But ideally, we don't. It's hard to know which companies don't have a business continuity program, and then to be able to compare that data with what impacts have they seen when they don't have it compared to with when they do. So that would be great to collect, but of course you'd have to get people to raise their hand and say.
It's a momentous task to get that.
And you'd have to have people who are willing to raise their hand and say, yes, we don't have a business continuity program. Let me show you the impacts that we've experienced because of it.
And also, like, if we maybe think about it as a non-binary way, like in terms of when you're trying to estimate or understand how effective the business continuity plan is? Like, how do you try to determine? Like, do you have any metrics that you rely on when you're trying to look at your own business continuity planning, or maybe enterprises? Like, is it actually a sensible business continuity plan? Other than, I mean, if no disaster happens in 10 years, how can you tell that it was a good business continuity plan versus just a bunch of papers like nobody knew even existed?
That's correct. So I think, and again, this goes back to the data, right? You'd have to be able to compare the data to say, well, my company is the same as this other company over here. We have a plan and they don't. With our plan, we saw no impact for 10 years. They don't have a plan and they saw one every 3 years, right? Like that would be clear data. But again, the challenge with that is you'd have to get other companies to raise their hand to be able to say that they don't. Now, one thing I can say is that when doing the tests, you do have teams within larger companies that are willing to test at a deeper level, I guess, for lack of a better term,
Like
a more
drills.
invasive testing,
Yeah.
right? And so those teams, it is clear from the data that I've seen that when those teams are doing more of a deep dive, more of an invasive testing, that they do have less impactful events. But again, and you can show that, but that's not always to be able to show that as something that the senior leadership can process is not always guaranteed that they will look at it that way.
So among the available tests, do you find some of them more useful than others? For example, like you can have tabletop or maybe just paper-based walkthrough exercises, and on the other extreme, you can just like have full shutdown, and then that simulate the whole thing. Do you find like a balanced approach maybe, or like you need to have perhaps like once a year you need to have that full shutdown? I mean, how do you decide what is best to glean, like, is this business continuity plan effective?
I'll answer it with an example if I can.
Yeah, sure.
I was working with an engineer within a cloud test, right? And the engineer, he was doing the test and he did not follow the steps of the plan that he had in place, problem one. And the steps that he took didn't quite get the testing environment created the way we were supposed to. The challenge is that his training was off, right? The steps he was taking were not the right steps because he hadn't been trained on how to make the changes that need to be changed within the cloud environment. And so consequently, we had to do the test again after he got trained. And I say that to say two things. One, that when people talk about the cloud itself, there's an assumption that if we just have cloud, then we have redundancy, and so we should be good. But again, it goes back to the individual, right? That individual didn't know how to perform the test. Answering that, tying that into your question, if it was just tabletop, right, we would not have been able to know that engineer didn't know how to execute these steps,
A
right?
lot of people
Johnny, what are you going to
assume,
do?
right?
I'm going to do this, that, and that. And saying what you're going to do and actually doing it are not always the same things, right? I think the military has shown that time and time again. This is why they practice the way they do. Not necessarily with live rounds, but definitely with live activity, right? Within a training simulation. So tabletops are helpful in some isolated examples when we're dealing definitely with theory, right? With here's an idea of what we'd like to do. Tabletops are effective when you cannot do some actual testing. It might not be a deep dive. You might not be 100% shut down. But if you can't do 100% shut down, the discussion around it might be helpful. But if you can do any testing at all that is actual physical, where an engineer is able to take action, that is the better plan, right?
Show you for real. Is it effective or not?
Yeah, that is the better plan.
So let's talk about having you look into your crystal ball,
Sure.
right? Let's talk about the next 5 to 10 years in the business continuity space.
Golly.
What kind of trends and themes and technologies, we talked about AI, that's obviously probably going to be part of your answer, I would assume, but What else are you seeing out there, or anything that is going to directly have the biggest impact on this area that you could envision if you had to put money on it?
Well, I hate to steal your answer, but to me, I truly see the analysis of big data is the concern, right? That is what we're all protecting. That is the most valuable thing that a company has. And so the thing that AI can do very, very well is analyze more bits of information than a human can on its own. So it is natural then to assume that AI will be created that will probably use a percentage-based formula to say that if I see these 5 particular events within, let's say from the news, right? If I see these 5 particular events, that there's a 80% chance that a certain impactful event is likely, let's take action. And that is going to be helpful. I really feel like there's a concern of making sure that the human is in place to kind of help monitor it, because again, AI is only as good as the people who built it. I think the other part of it is the amount of data that has to be protected. Again, we're talking about big data. I saw an example where I think I should be able to say this. An example where an application had so much data that it couldn't completely be hosted within one region of a cloud provider.
Wow.
Right? So that's a problem. And if that's today, then what does that mean in 5 years, right? Past this prologue, we know that back in our day, if you had a 10 gig, let's just say 100 megabyte hard drive, right? You were doing something. You were cooking with grease. And now there are applications that you still couldn't fit on a 100 megabyte hard drive. And now that we're dealing with terabyte hard drives. So data is going to keep growing. And if that is the case, how do you best protect data that is so large that it currently can't be held in one location, right? So I think that is another piece that we will have to solve. That will be a challenge, clearly.
What do you think about the threat space? It seems like that's always evolving as well too. I'll give you an example. We've seen an increase in what appear to be natural disasters, fires on the West Coast, hurricanes seem like they're ever present on the East Coast. You've got technological threats that are out there now. Ransomware is a huge consideration today. I assume with AI that's going to exacerbate things. How does that impact the business continuity space in your estimation?
Yeah, I feel like that is cyber threats are one of the biggest variables that we try to plan for, but not successfully, right? Primarily because the threats that are out there can come in so many myriad of ways. And I'll just take an example like a ransomware, where you might have a company that says, you know what, we're going to go ahead and pay just to kind of get it over with, right? And so whether we had a plan or not, the actual plan that was decided upon was to pay the money just to kind of get out of it. Not necessarily a bad decision, but that was a decision that I have seen companies make. So then that means that we're in a space where, is the plan always to pay, I guess, up to what level? And then the threats keep changing. It's just a really shifting environment that I don't know that we have planned for very well currently. So going forward, I'm not sure what does that mean, because it's just going to keep shifting so fast that it'll be hard to keep up with. But again, these are threats that we have to deal with. So primarily what I then have seen is, again, trying to protect the data that's in place, or moving the data so that it operates in different areas that may not be targeted.
Understood. My last question for you today is, let's say somebody wants to be Mr. Justin Cobb. How does he go about doing that? What kind of training, what kind of education How do they become a business continuity professional?
I think I'll give you the light answer first. To me, the best case scenario within business continuity is that you're on a business continuity team that has a wide variety of backgrounds and can bring a wide variety of thought processes and skills to the team. So the plus about that is there's not one way to get here, right? But as it relates to business continuity itself and risk management, there's definitely a lot of, DRII, who's another company, obviously ISACA, which is our favorite company.
Sure, absolutely.
That does provide some training on this way. BCI is another one. So there are, different groups out there that do have direct training on business continuity and risk management. I think that the environment is varied enough that you can bring in, again, a myriad of skills, decide to focus on either risk management or business continuity and be helpful to the team. The thing I definitely want to encourage people to understand is that in getting on the team or focusing on business continuity, it's really a thought-based activity, right? Probably even more so than engineering or network engineering, where I came from, meaning that there's a lot of kind of sitting down and hypothetically, coming up with examples and kind of tossing the ball around with your team to say, hey, what needs to be protected? What's the next step as we work our way down to the end zone, going back to the football analogy, that we should take this year that we think we can get done. So there's not one way to do business continuity. Different companies do it differently. You can just, as long as you're willing to, sit with your team and contemplate and think, and willing to take small step initiatives to move the program forward, and definitely get some training. I think you can. That's the part I enjoy about it. You can bring all of those skills to the team and help the company be successful.
Yes, certainly. In terms of the technical skills, though, do you have any specifics that are top of your mind, that especially with the technologies that we talked about?
Yeah,
people should pay attention to.
Technically, I would say that the people that I've seen on these different teams, again, they come from so many different backgrounds. I've had project managers who joined the team. I've had, obviously, engineers that joined the team. I've had either data center folks who've joined the team. I've had people who came from from more of an incident management background that have joined the team.
Security operations stuff.
Right. So like operations. And so I think that the skills you will need, depends on what's being protected. Since we're talking about from an IT standpoint, anything from project management to any type of IT management skills that you can bring is helpful, right? But if you're going to get on the team and you can't hypothesize more about possible outcomes, right, and strategizing about the possibility of a thing that hasn't happened yet, that's really the skill that is needed. And so to be able to sit down, right, and then write a plan or create a plan around the idea that you came up with is really the most invaluable thing. The thing I enjoy about it is probably the most thought-provoking part of my career that I have had, right? Network engineering and all those other operations-based, it just doesn't it doesn't require it as much. I want to word that carefully. I don't want to put anybody down, but it requires a different set of skills than this. This is almost like Taken, right? You have to have a certain set of skills to make this happen.
Okay, Justin, well, hey, we are out of time. We want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on business continuity and resilience.
Thank you very much for having me. This is a good, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Cyber Insights, an ISACA-GWDC radio show. The chapter's website is www.isaca-gwdc.org. Be sure to subscribe to our show. And join us next time as we continue exploring cybersecurity, IT audit, risk management, governance, and business resilience. Until next time, stay secure.